generation that lived through World War I is gone, and the last surviving veterans have died. But their memories live on in a remarkable project that recorded their stories on film.
Young people like myself are saying, we'll show those Germans, we'll push them back home.
Everywhere you went, a great big posters up of Kitchener. His fingers seemed to be pointing at your king and country need you.
In this series, those who were there tell the story of the war in their own words.
You've got no feelings of humanity. Right then. Afterwards, yes.
In this episode, we hear from those who survived the war's deadliest day.
Couldn't help being a bit frightened, I think. But you couldn't show it. Got to bottle it up.
Whether you were going to shoot Germans or whether they were going to shoot you, you never knew what the future held.
These last veterans of World War I revealed their experiences in the hope that what they went through would never be forgotten. When Allied and German troops had met in northern France, many had expected a quick battle. Instead, the front line became fixed from Belgium to the Swiss Alps. Trenches were dug, stalemate began. But in early 1916, the new British commander Douglas Haig hatched a plan. A big push intended to break through the German lines. The British were to support the French in a mass attack 25 miles wide, either side of the River Somme. The rolling chalk landscape concealed German defences dug into high ground, but generals were confident the enemy positions could be captured. For the troops in the front lines, the big push couldn't come soon enough. Among those waiting for the off was 21-year-old infantry officer Richard Hawkins.
People said that Haig was wrong in making us go and fight the enemy. Damn it, we couldn't sit there forever. You got to get on with the job. The French had been very nearly knocked out, and we got to get on with the job and kill the Germans.
For 7 days before the attack, one of the largest artillery bombardments in history filled the air. Over 1.5 million shells rained down. To take part in the infantry assault, more volunteer soldiers arrived in France. From Norfolk came 21-year-old Tom Dewing.
We were all convinced that this was the push which was to end the war. We were certainly very impressed with the thunder of the guns because it started all at once. And terrific. And it went on and on and on. Thunder, thunder, thunder. With the practice here, you could pick out the individual types of gun firing.
The continuous barrage was intended to shatter German defences and resistance. Officers told soldiers that after the apocalyptic shelling, crossing no man's land would be a simple stroll. 19-year-old infantryman Arthur Wagstaff had complete faith in his orders.
Our instructions the previous day, of course, were that when you make the attack tomorrow morning, don't run. Walk across.
What became known as the Battle of the Somme was set to begin on the 1st of July 1916. At 7:30 a.m. along the front, wave after wave of men would be sent over the top. More than 120,000 British troops waited for the off. But when the time to go approached, even the keenest began to feel nerves.
You couldn't help being a bit frightened, I think. But you couldn't show it. Got to bottle it up.
I'm like this, in the trench, with a cigarette, my last cigarette in my fingers, and I was like that. Oh, I don't mind telling you. That's how I was.
As they took up last-minute positions, they thought it would be over quickly. Little did they know that this would be the first day of 4 months of fighting. The top brass was so sure of a walkover, cameras were there to record the victory. But the week-long British bombardment had failed to destroy the enemy defences. Weapons ready, the Germans were waiting. As the big guns fell silent, units readied themselves for the assault. Tunnels had been dug under the German defences, and just before the whistles blew, huge mines were detonated to destroy enemy strongholds. Signaller Tom Dewing was on lookout duty. His high vantage point gave him a perfect view.
I remember the mine going up. We had been told beforehand that it was going up, and there was a terrific explosion. The whole ground shook, and that came a few seconds after the explosion itself.
At the northern end of the Allied assault, Arthur Wagstaff went over the top with the 56th London Division near the village of Gomcourt.
As soon as we got the instructions to jump over the top, we went, and our company sergeant major was sitting on the parapet and yelling to the boys, "Go on, boys, over the top, over the top." And as I came up into the trench, I could see 2 or 3 of our fellows, including 2 brothers who were lying dead in the trench. They had been killed, of course, by the German gunfire. Then we looked along the line, and we realised there were very few of us left.
22-year-old Fred Francis and his unit, the Lonsdale Battalion, were positioned in a nearby forest, waiting to attack.
At 0 hour, when we filed out of this wood, the colonel patted me on the back. He said, "Good luck, son." But we were literally sitting ducks. They just mowed us down like grass in the hayfield.
Back at his lookout, Tom Dewing watched in disbelief as a catastrophe unfolded.
In the first place, there was a certain amount of mist. And then when you add to that the enormous amount of smoke from the barrage, a great deal was hidden. When the mist cleared and the smoke cleared, we were able to see the infantry going forward. In some cases, they didn't get very far. They were just wiped out.
And I dropped on my face and put my steel helmet on the back of my head, and I could hear the shrapnel dropping on my steel helmet. I just said to myself, this is the last of the Lonsdale Battalion. There'll be no battalion left after this, and there wasn't, and never has been. I'm the only survivor, I think, of the original Lonsdale Battalion.
On the first day of the Somme, 20,000 soldiers were killed and 40,000 wounded. The British Army's worst ever losses in a single day. It fell to the stretcher bearers to save as many lives as they could.
It's bloody awful. If you ever carried a chap on a stretcher, I felt that my arms were coming out their sockets. A chap gets very heavy, you know, to carry him very far on a stretcher. I was only a youth and I hadn't got all that strength. To carry a chap on a stretcher, you don't want to have to go very far with him. Especially when you've got to cross terrain where it's all bumpy and very difficult terrain. So work on a stretcher is very, very exhausting.
Stretcher bearers worked in teams with a minimum of 2 to a casualty. To cross obstacles took 4 or more men. Many of them became casualties themselves as they scoured no man's land for the wounded. "19-year-old Bill Easton from Norfolk was teamed up with a more experienced bearer called Tom Barras. The older man did his best to put Bill at ease.
He told me, he said, if you're going to be hit by one of these shells, you'll get hit, and that's all you'll know. He'd say, so I'd kick up a hell of a fuss about it. He used to swear like a trooper, and Tommy was an inspiration. The time I was with him, we walked through, I don't know how many shells used to come over, but they were flying overhead, and Tommy would be walking along with it and take no notes of them. Stick your head up, he said, and get along.
But nothing could prepare stretcher bearers like Bill for the terrible injuries inflicted by a new generation of industrial weapons. Shell fire and shrapnel cut through the human body with devastating effect.
Most of them, they were chest or stomach wounds, and they were really serious. And that was awful to handle them. You know, you'd practically pick them up in pieces, but if they were still alive, you had to cart them away, and you know jolly well that they'd die at any time. The main thing was getting them out of it, and that's what we used to do.
While men fought and died abroad, at home, life went on. Stretcher bearer Dick Barron's 14-year-old sister Kathleen had a job playing the piano in her local cinema. As silent newsreels from the front line came through, she accompanied the images flickering on the silver screen above her.
I so loved playing the piano. I got this job, much to my amazement. And it was the silent films, of course, and all the different films about the war, and I had to play accordingly. I was told that I had a lot of expression in my playing, and according to what was on, so I would look and play just from my mind, no music. If it was bombing, a terrible, terrible fight, I would know what sort of music to play.
It was at the piano that Kathleen first saw images from the Somme. Over 20 million Britons watched along with her as news of the bloody battle seeped into domestic life. Some of the scenes were staged for the cameras, but many were raw reality. And they had a terrible effect on the families who saw them.
It almost seemed unreal to me. You know, it couldn't be going on. But of course it was. And the terror of it affected me. And yet I could feel the sadness and the horror from the audience. You could feel it.
The shock of losing so many men took time to sink in, at home and on the front line. The battle continued, becoming a terrible, draining stalemate. 3 months in, at the beginning of September, General Haig called for another big push. One more all-out attempt to break through German lines. It would be the greatest British attack since the Battle of the Some's first day, and the offensive would reveal Britain's new secret weapon, the tank. Archie Richards was one of those selected for the new tank corps. At first, these monster machines had the men baffled, but they soon realised their potential.
We saw them, and we talked together about it. And we said, well, what is this? They got tracks, and they must have got an engine, and they must crawl around. You know what I mean? And we sized them up that way. An armoured crawler, that's what I called them. And of course, when we got in them and got moving around with them, well, we knew exactly what they were for. And the armaments, when we got inside and we saw the armaments, we said, well, this is really it.
These tanks were designed to navigate no man's land, to reach German machine gun positions unscathed.
We had to go over the old trenches and bodies and everything else, you know, and then the stink. The smell was terrible, terrible, and it was hot. Well, the atmosphere was very, very sickening, really. Especially when you were in action and all the traps closed down. And splinters from the machine guns flying inside when we were in action, flying all about, little sparks. A terrible, terrible noise with our guns firing, the German guns firing, and machine guns going, and the noise of our engine and everything. Oh, yeah, shocking. We never deviated the tanks for anything. Only for action, you know. All feelings of humanity leaves you when you're fighting. You say to yourself, well, it's either him or me. See? So I got to get in first. So you've got no feelings of humanity right then. Afterwards, yes, perhaps.
Even with the power of the new tanks on their side, the big push failed to break through the German lines. The fighting had now been going on for 4 months, and the conditions on the Somme had become unbearable. The battlefield was a wasteland. Frontline positions were often little more than a string of shell holes. For men like Robbie Burns, who had been at the front since 1915, the strains were unrelenting.
Oh yes, no doubt about it. You get hardened sometimes. And you wonder all the time when it's going to finish. When is it going to finish? And you're hoping you get a blighty one somewhere. It's not serious.
A blighty wound was an injury that wouldn't kill you, but would require you to be sent home for treatment. Some men resorted to desperate measures to acquire one.
The chap is sitting next to me, lying on his stomach. His legs up in the air, like that. He's lying down there. His legs up in the air. I said, keep your legs down. Why? I said, you'll get shot. He said, I want shot. I said, why? He said, well, I want one in the leg, then I'll get one for blighty. I won't need to go on any further. I wasn't wounded. I wasn't wounded in the leg. I don't want to stand up and get shot in the stomach. He was looking for a wound in his leg. I said to this chap here, I said, a good idea that. He did the same. He just lay in his stomach with his legs up in the air like that, hoping to get a bullet in so that he wouldn't have to go on any further.
At the end of the 4 months of fighting on the Somme, the British Army had captured around 5 miles of ground. For that tiny gain, 600,000 men had been killed or wounded. The scale of the conflict now meant that the whole of Britain's economy had to be geared to war. As the fighting on the Western Front ground on, the home front mobilised for action. In the next episode, we'll hear from those who fought the Germans from their own fields, factories and front gardens.